10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Children's Authors Live. My name is Philip Womack. I am a children's author. We are at Hollyfield School in Surbiton. Hooray! We are celebrating World Book Night. And I'd also like to welcome all of the 2,000 schools who are watching us. Hello, hello from sunny Surbiton.
2,000 schools?
Yeah,
Now, I've got two wonderful authors here whose books are being given away free. And some of you have them here. Some of you may have them at home. On my right, I have David Almond, whose book Skellig is a wonderful story about a boy who finds an angel in his shed. And Annabel Pitcher, whose book My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, is a book about a boy whose sister dies in a bomb attack. So what I'd like to talk about to start with is World Book Night is all about reading. And I wanted to ask you, when you were young, what was the first book that really fired you up? David.
The thing I remember, we had very early readers when I was a kid, Janet and John, I think it was. And they had a picture, a very kind of ordinary picture facing text on the other side. And I thought these things were just beautiful. And I remember as a boy thinking, isn't that picture lovely? Oh, isn't the shape of those letters lovely? And then a book that really fired me up a bit later was King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table by Roger Lancelot Green, with fantastic illustrations by a German artist called Lotte Reininger. And it's still in print. It's a great, great book. So they were two things that really inspired me when I was young.
The King Arthur book was the same one for me. I remember reading it on a plane, and it held me spellbound for 9 hours.
Fantastic book.
I think the first book I can remember really loving was when I was about 4 or 5, and it was Flat Stanley.
Yeah.
And we read it as a class reader at primary school. And if you're not familiar with it, it's about a boy who gets squashed. And I can't remember how he gets squashed, but he becomes really flat to the point where he can be folded up and put in an envelope and sent in the post. And I thought at 4 or 5 that was the coolest thing ever.
And that's something that I would quite like to be done. I'd like to be posted somewhere.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to talk about your more recent books that you've read. Anything that you've read recently that's really made you think, wow.
The thing about reading is you read things, oh, that's all right, that's all right, that's all right. And then suddenly you'll find a book which is, oh, it's absolutely fantastic. And I brought one along. This book is called Kith by a fantastic writer called Jay Griffiths. And she wrote a book called Wild, and she's a writer who's just an extraordinary writer. And it's a book I never expected to find. Somebody said you should read Jay Griffiths. I found it by this kind of process of what's called serendipity, surprise, and it was just amazing, this book called Kith. And also a book I read every so often, actually. It's by a Japanese poet who lived hundreds of years ago called Basho, A Narrow Road to the Interior.
That sounds amazing.
Is that one that you come back to then?
I keep coming back to it. And it's a book about walking and writing, and I love walking. And when I'm walking in Northumberland, I think about Basho walking in Japan hundreds of years ago, and that's what stories do, isn't it?
Yeah.
They hold you together. Yeah.
And that's something about books that you really love, is that you always come back to them and you always find something in them that's new and exciting.
Well, for me, the book that I always come back to is The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley. And I first read that when I was probably about 14, and it was the first time I'd had that experience of thinking, this person, this writer knows exactly, they might have been alive 100 years ago, but they know exactly what I'm going through. The story's about a boy called Leo, and he gets caught in this adult world that he doesn't really understand, and he's used as a go-between between two people having an affair, and he doesn't really understand that they're having an affair, and it just resonated with me. And I've read it, it's probably the only book that I've read over 10 times, and even now I kind of come back to it every couple of years. Another one like that is A Christmas Carol. I always read that at Christmas by Dickens. But probably the most exciting modern book that I've read, Emma Donohue's Room.
Oh, yes.
About a girl who has a young son, and they're caught, they've been kind of kidnapped, abducted, and they just live in this room. And this little boy has been born in this room, and he doesn't understand that there's a world outside the room. And it's just, the narrative voice is amazing, and how she really gets inside the boy's head. It's told from the little boy's point of view, and he's not aware that there is anything apart from this room, and it's really brilliant.
I think that's what a lot of really good books do, is that they take a child's point of view and they take the adult point of view, and they show how the two don't quite match up. And I think both of you do that really well in your books, particularly in Skellig where there's an angel in a shed, and is it an angel, is it an owl, we don't know. And in Annabel's book where the guy thinks he's Superman and maybe he's got powers, maybe he doesn't. So how do you find that, the interaction between the magic and the real in your books?
For me, when people talk about the magic in my books, I think, well, yeah, but the magic can only work if it takes place in a real place. So in Skellig, for instance, Skellig takes place in a very real place, in a garage, in a house, which are real. They're the house that I used to live in Newcastle. And I think for me, if there's any magic at all, it has to happen in the real world. So as a writer...
What's great about Skellig is it Chinese food?
Chinese food,
that he and it's this supernatural, you think supernatural being who just loves Chinese food.
Chinese food, yeah.
He also knows the menu off by heart. Yeah. I think it's number 57, I think.
That's just brilliant.
Yeah. And I think that's, as a writer, my first job is to make things seem real. So when the reader reads the book, it feels like, oh, I'm actually in this book. And you do the same. You know, your world is very real. It's very real.
Yeah, well, there's not really a kind of fantasy element to my book apart from the little boy Jamie, who's the protagonist in My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece. His sister's been killed in a terrorist attack, and his family really care more about this sister who's died than they do about him. That's how it feels from his perspective anyway. And to kind of cope with that, he pretends to be Spider-Man, and he puts this T-shirt on that his mum gives him for his birthday, and he feels powerful, and it's his way of dealing with it, I suppose. Now,
the act of reading, for me, is quite a magical experience, and it always has been. And I wondered what it meant to you, the act of actually reading a book.
I love, I love books. I love, like, the object. I love the thing. And,
so you're not an e-book reader?
I read on e-books, but I can't really feel like I'm close to them. The thing about a book is it's like an object, and I love print. I love the way print looks on paper, and I love pages, and it sounds romantic, and I love the smell. But actually, I think we'll learn to read through a very physical way. I learned to read in my reception class, and my teacher taught us to read with a stick of chalk. She'd make a pattern on a board going f, and then she'd go to us f, and we'll go f, and then we'd make the mark on our pages, and I love that, and I think it sort of accentuates the fact that reading and writing are physical things that to do with the body, and a real thing is lovely. You can't do that with an e-reader.
How about you, Annabel?
And you can't go like that with an e-reader.
Yeah, I mean, I think reading has just been something that I've done my whole life, and I'm sure there's lots of people here and you'll have different experiences of reading. Some people will be really active readers, and I was like you, I suppose, and when I learned to read, it was just this really exciting code that I could suddenly understand, and it just unlocked this magical world of, Flat Stanley or Narnia or whatever it was, and it just felt like how amazing to be able to look at these letters, and the letters to form pictures in my head, and those pictures to kind of entertain me. And I wasn't allowed to watch much television when I was younger, or, I had 2 hours a day, I think, when I was allowed to put the TV on, and then apart from that, I had loads of endless time, and reading was just the thing that I did.
It's like the book itself is a portal to another world.
It is,
and you kind of dive into it, and you make the world yourself. So, since you were both quite bookish as readers, as children, when was the moment when you first thought, hang on a minute, I want to be the person that makes that story? Can you remember that moment? Was there a moment?
I can. There was a few moments, actually. Like the first job that I wanted to do when I was about 4 or 5 was be a water slide tester. And then I realised that wasn't an actual job. So I was looking for something else to do. And it was when I was in secondary school, year 7, I had a brilliant English teacher. And we had to write a story called Ooby Dooby Island, which was about a group of expeditioners who had to go and discover this island. And you were supposed to write a few pages of a travel diary, and I just couldn't stop writing. And it was my first time, really, of being in control of the material and having license, I suppose, to just do whatever I wanted. And we devoted quite a few lessons to it, and I ended up writing over 100 pages. And I got to take it to the headmaster in a pink file, and I was so proud of it. And that was my first experience of being a writer. But, I had to change my mind about what sort of job I wanted to do all the way through my teens. But then it was when I was in my early 20s, I went into a tiny little bookshop in Ambleside, and I was interested in teen fiction. I just loved reading it. And it was at that point I thought, maybe I could have a go at this properly, and just tried. And
how about you, David?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't particularly bookish. I loved books, but I loved doing lots of other things as well. And I knew when I was very young that I wanted to be a writer. I thought, I want to write books. I wanted to see my books on the library shelves, but also wanted to play for Newcastle United, so I spent a lot of time.
Are you a good footballer?
I'm fantastic. This is one of the reasons why Newcastle have never done anything. They didn't realise how fantastic I was.
Lost talent there.
Yeah. But I always had the sense that what I wanted to do was to write books, because the thing about the physicality, I loved making marks, and I used to...
It's big for you, that, isn't it? The
yeah,
actual act
I
of
love,
it.
you know, the way your body makes the shapes. And I used to write stories at home on sheets of paper and stitch them together and put pictures on the cover and turn them into books, that kind of thing. And then just kept on writing and writing and writing, and just that's what I thought I would do. And I still love the act of writing. I think it's a beautiful thing to do. And I think there's a danger of making it seem, oh, it's really kind of really remote and arty and stuff. It's not, you know, it's just ordinary. Reading is ordinary. Writing is very ordinary. It's not something highfalutin. It's not something very strange. It's something we all do. It's like babies when they're first learning to read and write. They do it because they love it. And I think that's what writers do. Yeah,
Do you write longhand now?
I do a lot of scribbling. I scribble in notebooks, and then I work onto the screen, because the screen is fantastic to write on. But I love scribbling in notebooks. I always have notebooks, yeah. Do you?
Yeah, I do. Because I feel like I should, but I don't often use them. Yeah, I'm more on the computer these days. In fact, I wrote the first book, this one, whilst I was travelling around the world, just in notepads.
Oh, right, yeah.
And it was quite a different experience. And I wrote my second and my third on a laptop.
Oh, yeah.
I have lots of notebooks, but I don't know what's in any of them. So both of your books are quite focused on the idea of family, and there are both these quite intense sibling relationships in them. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, I mean, in Skellig, the sibling relationship is a boy who's maybe 10, 11, and he's got a very desperately poorly baby sister. And when I was writing Skellig was a weird book, because it almost seemed to write itself. It just seemed to pour out of me. And when I was writing, I thought, oh, Michael is like me, because when I was a young boy, I had a very poorly baby sister. So that came from that. But I couldn't think about that. I couldn't think this is about my sister Barbara. I thought, I can't think like that. You've just got to write the story. And the parental relationships, I guess, are a bit similar to my parents. My mother had terrible arthritis, and Skellig has terrible arthritis. And when I realised that, I thought, Skellig's a bit like my mother.
Does she like Chinese food?
She didn't. No, she didn't like Chinese food. Maybe she would have. Yeah. But that thing about arthritis, you know, it's like when you write, the things that you're really interested in, things that kind of make you as a person, just come out. And I think that's one of the things you have to do when you write, is not to think I'm going to write something to impress somebody else. You've got to write something that really comes from you, something that really interests you. Don't write for somebody else. I know you have to when you're in school. But somehow get to write the things for somebody else, but they're really about you. Yeah.
I would definitely agree with that. I think everyone has the power or the potential to write, but you have to sort of unlock something that you want to show to the world, really.
Absolutely.
Annabel, how about that brother-sister relationship in your...
Yeah, it's difficult. In My Sister Lived on the Mantelpiece, there's 3 siblings. So there's Jamie, who tells the story. He's 10. And then his older sister, Jasmine, is 15. And Jasmine's twin sister, Rose, is 15. And she's the one that got killed in a terrorist attack. So I imagined it happened in London. And I imagined that the whole family witnessed it. So you can imagine what impact that has had on the family. And my book starts 5 years after the terrorist attack. And it's quite difficult for Jamie because the rest of his family remember Rose. Obviously, the parents remember her, and a twin sister misses her terribly. But Jamie was only 5 when his sister got killed in this terrorist attack. So for him, he's okay. He's got over Rose's death, and that makes him quite an alienated figure, really, within his own family because they're grieving, and he's not. And he feels guilty that he doesn't miss Rose the way that they do. So Rose, even though she's dead, is quite a powerful presence in the novel, and her ashes, the bits, you know, that were cremated, are on the mantelpiece, which is why the book is called My Sister Lived on the Mantelpiece. And the dad loves this urn that lives on the mantelpiece. He puts a stocking by it at Christmas. He gives it a piece of birthday cake, and to Jamie, it feels like this sister is more important than him.
And in fact, most of us have siblings, so both of those relationships really resonate with us, because certainly my relationship with my brother, I kind of hate him, but I kind of love him at the same time. So I was thinking also about children's books in general, and the need for crisis in a children's book. And I wondered whether that was the driving force in how you came to write your books, whether you felt that it needed a sort of moment which then led to sort of a moment of hope.
Yeah, I think I never set out to write, I suppose, a book about crisis, but you do need your character to be in conflict with the world that they're in, otherwise it's not dramatically interesting. But I was wary with My Sisters on the Mantelpiece of making it too dark. Mm-hmm. You know, at one point my editor looked at my manuscript and said, look, you've got terrorism, death, racism, grief, alcoholism, anorexia. You don't need domestic violence in there as well, because there was a scene of domestic violence. And she was absolutely right. And I think it's trying to keep something real and interesting, but like you say, have that hope. That's what's most important, and that courage and resilience in the face of adversity.
David?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in Skelliger's, the sort of major crisis is the baby's very poorly. Is the baby going to die? So yeah, the book stems from that crisis. So you need some kind of trouble. And writing doesn't start with happiness. You know, it can include happiness. But in some way that starts with trouble. Drama is about trouble. There's some kind of problem. But if you become too sort of conscious of that, think, oh, I've got to write a book about trouble, I've got to write a book about crisis, then you'll think about the crisis rather than thinking about the story. Whereas good stories come from just ordinary people, because everybody, in a sense, is in a crisis. One of the best things anybody ever said to me, and said, I live by this to him, said, be kind, for everyone is living a great battle. And I thought, that's true, isn't it? Everybody's living through some kind of crisis. Everybody.
All the time, yeah.
All the time. Yeah.
So let's just talk briefly about your new books, Catch Up Clouds, which is...
Silence is Goldfish, actually.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Silence is Goldfish.
Yeah. Well, I've got a new book out October the 1st, which is really exciting. So it's called Silence is Goldfish. And it's about a girl who, she's kind of gone along for 15 years of her life thinking things are one way. And then she discovers a secret about herself that changes everything she knows and leads her to mistrust everybody around her. I'm not going to reveal what that is, because that would ruin the story. And as a result, she takes a vow of silence, because she spent her whole life, I suppose, feeling like I did when I was a teenager, which is I always try to say the right thing, you know, and be a good sort of student, good daughter, good sibling. And she's felt like her life has been scripted a little bit. And then there comes this moment where she discovers this secret, and she decides that she's not going to do that anymore, and she takes it to the extreme, and she becomes silent. So it was quite tricky to write, because she doesn't speak for 2/3 of the book. And
lots of blank pages.
Yeah, it's just blank. And that's what it's about.
Good. And David, your new book?
It's a great title, that.
Oh, thank you.
Silence is Goldfish, what a great title. My most recent book is the one on front there, A Song for Ella Gray, which is a book about, it's about love and death. It's set in Tyneside and in Northumberland, where I live, and it's a retelling of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. Orpheus, who was the greatest singer the world has ever seen, and he falls in love with Eurydice, who in my story is called Ella Gray, and Ella dies, and Orpheus goes to the underworld. He travels to the underworld to bring her back again, and in my story, the underworld, you find it in a tunnel under Newcastle. So Orpheus goes under Newcastle and he finds the way to hell. And he gets to hell and he persuades the gods to let Ella come back again. So Ella comes back with him, back towards the surface world. But they've told him, you must never look back until you're both out into the world. And as he steps into the world, he turns around to check that she's still there. And of course she is still there. But she says, oh, you weren't supposed to look. And back she goes down to Hades, back to hell.
It's one of the most poignant stories in all of Greek myth, and I think you deal with it really, really well. Yeah. Just before I open up the questions to the floor, I've got one final question for you, because it's Shakespeare's birthday today. I don't know if you knew that. Probably not. I didn't until this morning. He also died on the same day, which is quite weird. So I just wanted to ask you what your favourite Shakespeare play was and why, and if you haven't read one before, which one you think they should start with.
Oh, gosh. Well, there's two answers to this. I pretend that it's Othello, which I studied at A-level, and it's probably the only Shakespeare play that I really genuinely understand from beginning to end. And I think it's just fantastic, and it deals with jealousy and rivalry and insecurity. But really, I'm a sucker for Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, as an English teacher, which I used to be, I loved teaching that. So yeah, Romeo and Juliet.
It's a goodie.
Yeah, Romeo and Juliet. I love Macbeth. We saw Macbeth again recently, and it's just fantastic. I love the witches. I love the language in it. But also I love the Tempest, and I keep trying to write the Tempest setting. I try and set the Tempest
How's that going?
in Northumberland. I know, that's right. That's right.
It's not an ambitious project at all.
It is a bit, isn't it? But the Farne Islands are there. We've got storms, so we could have the Tempest set in Northumberland.
I think you've
so
got a good Caliban.
Okay,
that's right.
I've got some questions here from schools that are watching, I think. So I'm going to start with a question from Wakefield City Academy. So this is for both of you. What is your favourite book that you've made?
Oh, that we've actually written?
Yeah. Well, I presume made means written rather than physically.
Well, hi, Wakefield. I used to teach in Wakefield, Wakefield Girls High School. Well, it's easy for me because I only have 3. Everyone says it's a bit like choosing between your children. I think my first one, because it was interesting what you were saying about how your mum came, the arthritis and your experience of having a sibling who was ill. And I think your first one in particular kind of encapsulates what you've experienced in life up until that point. And so that one, I think I feel probably most proud of.
I think, you always feel quite, almost like having a child, that relationship with your first book. David?
I think in some ways my favourite book is the book that I wrote before I wrote Skellig. It's called Counting Stars. And it's a collection of short stories all about my family. It's kind of a fictionalized version of my family. And when I was writing it, I kind of unlocked all the kind of things that I should be writing about that I'd been kind of hiding away from until I wrote the stories in Counting Stars. This is what I need to do.
Relief.
Yeah.
I have a question from ABC International School, who says, I wanted to ask how important the north of England is to either of you in your writing. They're both from the north of England.
I think I spent a long time thinking I'm not northern, I don't come from the north, I'm not going to write about the north, and now I'm northern, I live in the north, and I write about the north. It's really important to me. It's become a place of it's my imagination. And we were just talking about this earlier, I actually really like being out of things. I love being on the edge of things. Just north of me is just big, empty spaces. And it's very important to me. Yeah.
I think landscape and location is quite important in both of your books, actually. You really get that sense of dislocation as well when you move from one place to another, and that sets up all sorts of different conflicts as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think, in particular, with My Sis Lives on the Mantelpiece, because I was writing it whilst I was travelling around the world, my husband and I decided to take a year off work, and we just set off on this adventure. And I think because I was quite homesick, setting a book in the north of England, I set it in the Lake District, which is a place, probably my favourite place on earth. It's where I had my honeymoon. I think it was almost kind of a wistful feeling, but also I wanted Jamie to feel isolated and to kind of show that through where he lived. And I loved the idea of him being in a little cottage surrounded by mountains and not able really to kind of make connection very easily with people. But yeah, I think all my books are set in the north. I suppose it's just easier for me to imagine that rather than here.
It's such an important part of the way that you think as well. Like, I'm sure when you get up in the morning, where you are, what you see around you, that's so much a part of how you think and you dream.
It just permeates you, doesn't it?
I still dream about my sort of default setting for dreaming is when I was about 10 years old, and I still dream about my house when I was 10, which is quite strange. I've never...
Where was that?
In Sussex, so not far from here.
Yeah.
It's amazing how powerful those images are. I have a question from the King's School, which is, do you write books with the intention to bring your views about society across to society?
No, I don't.
Do you think anyone does?
I think they do come across, and you can't help but colour what you're writing with what you think about the world, but I don't ever set out to write a message, really.
No, it comes out, and if you started by thinking, I'm going to really teach some people something through this book, you're on a loser. You've just got to write the best story that you can, and then in the process of writing it, you say, oh, yes, I really kind of believe this. This really matters. Yeah.
Another question from the King's School, which I'm not sure whether this works with Skellig, but have you ever based your stories on real-life experiences?
It's funny because My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, it feels so personal, and then people say, oh my goodness, so did you have a sibling that died in a terrorist attack? And I didn't, I'm glad to say, but it does encapsulate everything that I think about what it is to be a child and struggling with growing up and being on that cusp where you're not really sure who you are because you're not quite adolescent yet, but you're definitely not a young child. And I really struggled myself with knowing my own place in the world. And there's something that happens at the end that I'm not going to reveal because it'll spoil it for the people who have got the book in their hands today. But that was very much based, the kind of climax of the story was based on something that happened to me.
Yeah, and lots of my books come from real people, real occasions. And even Skellig, Skellig is set in the house that I used to live in. The garage in Skellig is exactly like the garage we had. The baby sister I kind of think is based on my baby sister. Skellig is strangely based on my mother in some way.
Did you, when you were writing Skellig, did you fix in your mind what the creature of Skellig was, or were you happy for it to be quite mystical and moving?
And sometimes I'll go to places and, David's here, now he can tell us what Skellig is. What is Skellig? I say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's quite important, that there's that sense of mystery about some things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, people say, isn't that strange? But actually, everything's strange, isn't it? The world's really weird. I find the world deeply mysterious. You are really mysterious. People say Skellig's mysterious. You look really mysterious. We are, aren't we? We're all very mysterious. And there's no final answer to what we are. And it's the same with Skellig. There's no final answer to what Skellig is.
There's no final answer to what we are. That's a very good summary of how fiction works. It's just a way of finding out more about who we are.
Right.
Okay, are we ready for questions from the floor? I think so. Who wants to start? Yes, gentleman in the middle. Can you wait for the microphone? Talk amongst yourselves, or don't.
Which ones of your characters do you think that you connected with the most?
That's a great question. Okay. I think probably the character in my second book, she's a girl called Zoe, or you think she's called Zoe. She hides her identity. You find out in the first chapter that she's killed somebody. I haven't killed somebody, by the way, that's not why I connect with her. But
or so you say.
Yeah. And Zoe feels a huge amount of guilt. She's done this terrible thing. She's killed somebody, and the worst thing about her situation is that she's got away with it. So nobody finds out that she's responsible for the death of somebody else in the book. So she has to live with this guilt, and I wanted to write about a character who felt a lot of guilt, because when I was a teenager, I felt very guilty. And so I kind of connect with her, and I suppose her being female and a teenager, I can kind of imagine what she felt like. And she falls in love for the first time, and I really kind of connected with her.
Mm. With me, it's weird because Mina from Skellig, I feel really close to Mina. And 10 years after I wrote Skellig, I wrote a book all about Mina called My Name is Mina. And Mina's an adolescent girl. I'm not an adolescent girl. But I weirdly felt like Mina was part of me. So by calling myself Mina when I wrote the book, it was like the Mina in me came through me and allowed me to write the book. So sometimes you're kind of related to a character who seems totally different from you. You never know.
Well, it's interesting because both books, Skellig and My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, use the first person very effectively, and I wondered how that voice came to you, how you processed that.
For me, that's really important in getting the book right. It's like finding the voice that will carry through. And a lot of books take a long time to find the right kind of tone of voice, the right manner to write the book, and the right person to write it through. With Skellig, it just came with the first sentence. I found him in the garage on a Sunday afternoon, and right from there, it just kind of flowed through. But finding the voice is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, all my books are written in the first person. So I've got a 10-year-old boy, I've got two 15-year-old girls, but they talk quite differently, and the challenge is to try and make them real. So I always want it to feel, when you're reading my books, that the character is kind of whispering in your ear and you can hear the voice. And their voices aren't necessarily eloquent or accurate. They can be rough around the edges. They can use turns of phrases that maybe are slightly irritating, or but that's how they speak. We all have our own way of speaking, and it's trying to capture that. And that for me is the absolute joy. You know, I used to want to be an actress. I can't act at all. Every school play that I ever auditioned for, I was cast as in the back row. I went for the part of Maria in Sound of Music, and I was cast as Nun 10, I think. And so I think, in a way, writing is a way of performing in a quiet way, because you get to pretend to be different characters on the page.
I've met lots of writers who want to be actors, myself included.
And me.
Really?
Another question from the floor. Gentleman in the front. Sorry, can we... Yeah. Thank you.
How would you feel if your book was ever made into a film?
Well, Skellig was made into a film. Skellig became a film about 7 or 8 years ago. And the film business is very weird. It kind of, everything takes just years and years. And it took about 8 years for the film to come out. And at times I thought, don't do it, Dad. I don't care if they don't make a film. But in the end, they made the film, and actually it was pretty good. And I actually saw it again last week for the first time for a couple of years. And the best things in it were the two parents. I don't know if anybody's seen the Skellig film.
Seen it.
But the two parents, who are played by John Sim and Kelly MacDonald, they just looked ordinary. They just looked like ordinary people that you'd see walking along the street here. And that's important. So in the end, I liked it. There was also a film of Clay, a book called Clay, which the BBC did, and they did a fantastic small film, again, a few years ago. So it's been all right.
Were you involved in the script at all?
No, I wasn't, no.
And would you not want to be? Or?
I'd quite like to write a film, but I think I'd like to write it from scratch rather than adapting one of my own books. I've adapted stuff for stage, so a lot of my books have become stage plays, and that's fantastic, because I love drama. You know, I love...
Are you
Skellig? I'm just waiting to be called, yes, you'll be Skellig this time, Dave. Okay.
Just waiting for that call.
That's right. It's like waiting for Newcastle United to call me.
Maybe one day.
Annabel, how would you feel if you got that call from Spielberg,
which
we're all waiting for?
Well, I've sold the film rights of my first book this year, which is quite exciting.
Good.
But yeah, it's taking for it. You sort of expect it all to kind of happen quite quickly, and I think it will take a long time. Yeah, it's exciting. But it sort of feels a bit one step removed, though. You know, I've done the story, and I suppose it's just taking a step back and thinking that it's another artist's, another writer's take on your material, and you've got to give them license to do what they like with it to a certain extent. But I'm interested to see the result, definitely.
They're different things. A film and a book are different, and people always complain when a film isn't faithful to the book, but in fact, some things don't work on film, and they work very well in books. Another question from the floor? Yeah? There should be music whilst this goes on.
Are any of your characters inspired by people you know in everyday life?
In My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, there's a grumpy, I'm scared that she's watching, a grumpy older sister who's based on my slightly grumpy older sister who still scares me today. My sister was brilliant. She was kind of fierce, and all my friends were a bit scared of her. She was 2 years above me at school, and she hated me. I felt like she hated me, but then she had my back when I was at school, so if someone was picking on me, or she'd kind of weighed in, and she was fierce, and I wasn't, so she was a great person to have on side. But at home, I remember singing along to some music that she was playing in her room, and she was like, "Don't steal my music." Like, she was that adamant that she didn't want me to do anything that she was going to do. So that kind of, I suppose, love-hate relationship that you have with an older sibling is very much based on my sister Verity.
Yeah, and some of my characters are based on real people. Some of them I haven't told because they wouldn't want to know. And they read the books, they don't recognise that actually.
That's
some
interesting,
of the
isn't it, that
characters
they
are
don't?
That's right.
Yeah.
I slightly got around it because in my third book, there's a really annoying little sister who's nothing like my older annoying brother. He'll never know. He will now.
He will now, yeah.
Another question from the floor? Yes. If you just wait for the microphone, thanks.
Is there like a part in in any book that you didn't enjoy writing? Is there like a character that is really annoying and yeah?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Is there any part of the book that you didn't like or any character you found annoying?
Well, the great thing about writing is if you find yourself writing something that you don't like, you just change it. You don't do it. And that's what you try to do. You try to write a book that in the end you really like, with lots of bits in that you really like. And if you find a character, you can dislike characters because they're just the kind of people that you might dislike. But if you dislike them because they're not working as characters in the book, then you have to get rid of them or change them. Because writing it's endlessly just changing things and making them fit what you want it to be like. We don't write for someone else in a sense. We write to make the best book that we can in the best way we can. And if we don't like a character, I had a book called Kit's Wilderness, which came out just after Skellig. Half the time I was writing the book, it was called Quiet Michael in the Wilderness, because there was a character called Quiet Michael, who I got to hate. So I just got rid of him.
Why did you hate him?
He was just really boring. He was just deeply boring. And he used to walk along the river all the time in the story, so I think I just pushed him in.
Brilliant.
Have you ever killed off a character that you hate?
I haven't, no. I suppose in the fact that you write fantasy, it's easier to just give someone the axe.
Exactly. They got eaten by a dragon.
And that was the end of him. Scene.
Because actually you get really close to your characters, don't you?
You do, yeah.
And that's if you're going to write a book, it might take a year to write a book, you get really close to the characters. So even the ones who are pretty nasty, you get to kind of like them in some ways.
I have this strange thing where I become much more drawn to the evil characters in my book, which I think is slightly worrying about my own personality. Another question from the floor. At the back, please. Young lady at the back, yeah.
How did you come up with the characters and their personality?
Well, I think for me, it just takes forever. You start off, and I always try and plan my books really well, but I find that really impossible, that kind of very abstract thinking where you sit down and you've got your character and you're trying to imagine, well, they've got this personality and they say these kinds of things and this is what they do. And for me, the character only comes alive when I'm actually writing, and it takes so many, I can't tell you how many drafts, like you were saying, writing is just changing things, and through many, many, many drafts and rewrites, this character becomes a three-dimensional person, and you get to know them. And I almost feel like I have to get to know them as I'm writing it, which is frustrating because it means I've got to constantly go back to the beginning and revise things. And it's only then that they become this real person. And I never start off with them at the beginning.
Yeah, it's exactly the same for me. And I think that word become is really important. They become what they should be. And if you try, I know I'm going wrong if I'm trying to force my character to do particular things or to say particular things. Because when you get a character right, they're fully formed. Their name's right, they say the right things. But it can take a long time to get to that point.
I think minor characters are easier in some ways. Like in my first book, there's a girl called Sonia, who's a Muslim girl, and she was really easy to write, but I think because she's not as important to the story in some ways, and other characters that pop in every now and again, they feel easier sometimes, but the main character, I think, takes just a lot of effort.
Because writing characters is fascinating, actually, because we're human beings. We've got these amazing minds. We've got these amazing kind of psyches. And you can't actually imagine anything. And when you're writing about something, you can discover characters that you thought, I wouldn't know anything about them. But through the process of writing, you can imagine the most amazing things. And writing is about trusting yourself to do that and allowing these characters to appear on the page. Where did they come from? Oh, it's amazing.
And when they come into your mind fully formed and they do things naturally, it feels so wonderful.
Yeah,
they almost just take over. Yeah. Another question? How about you in the middle there? Yeah. Yeah, gentleman here.
Professional man.
How did you come up with the name of the book?
Interesting.
I think sometimes for my first book, the title was the thing that I thought of first. I had a really weird experience. I was traveling, like I said, in Ecuador, and I watched a film randomly in a youth hostel that was about September the 11th, the terrorist attacks in New York. And I decided that I wanted to write a book about terrorism, and the title came first. And it didn't, I thought probably a publisher would change it because it's a bit long, but they didn't. And then sometimes I think it comes at the end when you know what the book is about, and there's maybe a key phrase or something that just resonates with you when you're writing, and you think, oh, that'd be a great title.
I always have a title right from the start, even if I know it's the wrong title, and I think that's important. Sometimes titles come very early on. The title for Skellig came halfway through. For most of the time I was writing Skellig, it was called Mr. Wilson.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, what a terrible title. But I knew it was the wrong title, and I was waiting for the moment when I found out what it was called.
How did you get the name Skellig?
From the Skellig Islands off the southwest coast of Ireland. But there's a point in the book when Mina says to him, who are you, what are you? And this is halfway through the book, and I thought, it's about time I knew. And I looked up from the desk, and there in front of me was a book about the Skellig Islands. I thought, he's called Skellig, and the book's called Skellig. Oh.
And again, it just feels right sometimes when you know the title and you know it works, and you just get that sense that everything kind of fits together. Yeah. Another question from the floor? How about you in the front here? Yeah.
You use writing to escape from the real world.
Writing as escapism.
I think partly to escape for me, and partly to understand. It's a complete joy to write, because, you know, when things are difficult, it is a way of just kind of vanishing into a world. But it's also a way of making sense of things that maybe have happened to you or are happening to you, and obviously, hopefully, not in a very heavy-handed way, so that someone looking at it would think, oh, this writer was struggling at this point in time. But I definitely feel that through the process of writing and thinking about things and putting a story together, it helps me understand what this strange world is all about, and what humans are like, and why we do the things that we do. So it's partly an escape and partly to help make sense of things for me.
Yeah, I think it's kind of bound to be, because it is amazing. People say, what's the best thing about writing? The best thing about writing is just using your imagination and finding what just appears on the page in front of you. So it is, you could say that's escapism, but it's like playing football. When you play football, you forget who you are, don't you? When you're playing well, you forget you're you. And you become a better footballer by forgetting that you're you. And it's the same with writing. When you're writing well, David Almond disappears, Annabel Pitcher disappears. You're just this character on the page, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, writing is a way of exploring those feelings in a way that kind of gets rid of the self, which I think is quite good, because the world that we live in now is very focused on the self. It's all about Facebook and Twitter and selfies and things. Yeah. And when you're writing, you're actually consciously having to step into somebody else's mind, which is something that is quite extraordinary. Another question. Yes, at the back. Sorry, I'm making everyone walk so far.
Back, forward.
Give him fit.
If you were to make a sequel or prequel, what would it be about?
A sequel. I've always avoided doing sequels. I did a prequel to Skellig. My Name is Mina was a prequel, which I wrote 10 years after Skellig came out.
Did you always know you were going to do that?
No, I didn't know. I didn't have a clue. And it was an editor who said, how about writing a little bit of extra for the 10-year anniversary edition of Skellig? And I thought, oh, God, I don't want to do that. But as soon as I began to write Mina's notebooks, it was like Nina was inside me saying, come on, why is it taking so long? And
peering over the wall.
Yeah, that's right.
Annabel?
Yeah, I get a lot of emails from readers saying, will there be a sequel? And so far I haven't planned one. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting to explore the same world, but from a different character's perspective, like David did, and to think, well, how would maybe the older sister Jasmine, what would her story be?
How much time have we got left for questions?
1 minute.
1 minute left. So, okay, maybe 2 final questions. Quick. Okay, guy in the middle. Yep.
What's the book you most enjoyed making?
Book you most enjoyed making?
Most enjoyed. My Name is Mina. I really enjoyed writing My Name is Mina because I could do anything because I was Mina. Yeah. So I loved writing My Name is Mina.
My first book, because it was probably the easiest one. Yeah. My 3.
And final question. So much choice. How about you in the front here? Yes, you. Yeah.
What inspired you to write My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece?
It was the film that I mentioned about September the 11th, and thinking really how it must be really strange to lose someone very personal and private to you in such a worldwide famous way, and to have to relive that on things like anniversaries and have to lose ownership, I suppose, of that event, that very private event, because everybody else knew about it and had an opinion on it. So it was that inspired me.
One more, I think, yeah? Okay. How about lady at the back? Right at the back, far back, yeah.
Has anything like a publishing company ever tried to change something that you really didn't want changed?
Ooh, interesting.
No. No, I mean, no, they haven't. The great thing about working with publishers is you have an editor, and I love editors. I think editors are really important, so I have great relationships with my editors. And often they'll suggest something, say, how about sort of making a little change here? And if I agree with it, then I'll do it. But I've never been to the point where somebody said, you must change that.
Yeah, no, I think they make suggestions and often they can be good, because the hardest thing about being a writer is trying to read your own thing as a reader and to have that distance that you need to be able to judge it. And I think that's what an editor does, and they can make suggestions and you can either take them or not.
Yeah, exactly. I think a good editor tries to understand the book, and not that there are any bad editors out there, but if someone tells you something and it really, really goes against the grain of what you're thinking, and you know it's not right, then you shouldn't do it. Okay, well, I think that's it. I'd like to say a big thank you to David and Annabel for coming all the way here. Thank you all. Thank you all too for watching and for asking such wonderful questions. And thank you also to everyone watching. And remember, it's World Book Night, and read.